Hello DCAC members, this is Jake with the achievement report that I shared with our school board in September. I'll walk you through the slides and information on this report and we'll discuss it at our upcoming meeting on October 17th. These first two slides show our changing demographics and how we're becoming less comparable in our student groups to the overall statewide averages. I pulled data from census dates 2000, 2010, 2020, and this school year to show how we've changed. It's important to start with this information as we sometimes compare our data to the state data, but we're becoming less and less like the statewide averages in many of our student populations. Looking at the top graph, a reminder that educational benefits are the benefits that students receive if their family income is at or below certain thresholds. This can include free or reduced meals, transportation, athletics, and activities or other areas. We've changed significantly since the turn of the century, more than doubled from the year 2000, and we noticed that our educational benefit numbers have been down during the pandemic as meals were free to all students. We do see a large uptick in this school year, 2022-2023, compared to last year. The bottom chart includes our students who are learning English as an additional language, which has tripled since 2000 and is almost twice what the state numbers were in 22-23. They have maintained fairly steady since 2010. While we were comparative to the state in 2000, we no longer are. And for this next one, the top graph is for students with an IEP. They are students who are receiving special education services. This group of students has also increased over time for Roseville area schools as well as the state average. However, we continue to be just below the state average. On the bottom graph, BIPOC stands for Black, Indigenous, and People of Color, or for us, students of color. This group of students has changed significantly from 2000, with our students tripling in size and creating a more rich racial diversity and more racially balanced district. We have changed significantly in our student demographics from the turn of the century and find it to be an asset to our district. We've also become less and less like the statewide averages in these areas, making us less comparable to the state. And we add this slide in for context, not for excuses, but to know that all students, regardless of background, can and should learn at high levels. This next slide shows a comparison of Roseville to other districts and to the state. As we've discussed, we've become less comparable to the state, and we do find that we are more comparable to the districts that you see represented here. We often look at the data from these districts to see how we compare in terms of student achievement, graduation, and other areas. We chose these districts as they're more comparable to Roseville than the statewide averages. We'll start with our math achievement data. For this graph, there's 6 years of trend data, all based on the MCA3 math test. Roseville area schools is in blue, Minnesota statewide average is in red. The 2021 school year data is included, but it is not a comparable school year. As I described last year, that because of the pandemic and the limited number of students taking the test that year, it is not representative of our typical testing. You will also notice that 2020 is not included. That was the year that all state testing was canceled. For math, the tested grades are 3rd through 8th and 11th grade. Overall, Roseville decreased almost 12 percentage points, and the statewide average decreased about 10 percentage points. Now we're about 7 percentage points below the state, while we were about 6 percentage points below the state in 2019, the last year with comparable data. This aligns to significant declines nationwide as our students experienced interrupted instruction during the COVID-19 pandemic. This next slide is comparing our overall MCA scores to the statewide average for each grade. RAS stands for Roseville Area Schools as an abbreviation. This shows that each grade was significantly impacted by interrupted instruction, both for our district and for the state overall. All grade levels saw decreases from 2019, which is the year that we are using for comparison. For grade 11, the student participation levels were significantly reduced in 2022 and cannot be used for comparison to 2019 or 2021 or the statewide averages. The grade level that saw the smallest decline was grade 3, which declined 3 percentage points. This slide provides trend data for our student groups based by race and ethnicity. All student groups by race and ethnicity declined from 2019. Hispanic students and multiracial students had the smallest declines and saw decreases to the achievement gap compared to our white students. Large achievement gaps continue to persist between our BIPOC students and white students, ranging between 18 to 42 percentage points. This is another trend line slide with our student groups. This one shows our students who qualify for educational benefits, students with an individual education plan or IEP, and students who are English language learners. We saw declines for all of these student groups compared to 2019. This slide compares our district proficiency percent for each of our student groups compared to the statewide proficiency percentages. Most of our student groups fell below the statewide average, although our American Indian, Native American, white students, and multiracial students were above the state. This slide looks at Roseville area schools to our comparison districts for 2019 in dark red and 2022 in pink. The average math score in 2019 for our comparable districts was 46%, and in 2022 it was 34%. We continue to be above that average and are only outperformed by West St. Paul and Osseo. The average decrease from 2019 was 12 percentage points, which is about the decrease for Roseville area schools. The range of decrease in scores was from 8 to 22 percentage points. This slide shows MCA scores from 2019 to 2022 by school building. We saw decreases that ranged from 3 to 18 percentage points and shows that all of our buildings were impacted by interrupted instruction. These next two slides switch from MCA data to FastBridge math data. In this slide, we're looking at growth for all of our students tested, mostly at the elementary level. Growth in FastBridge is broken into 4 categories: aggressive, typical, modest, and flat. We want to see low flat growth and high aggressive growth. We did see higher rates of aggressive growth in 2022 compared to 2019, which equates to smaller rates of modest and flat growth. This shows a positive sign that even though our proficiency rates dropped, our students are still growing towards proficiency. This slide provides data on growth by race and ethnicity for A Math. Again, this is a test that's given mostly to elementary students. We see that white and multiracial students showed the highest rates of aggressive growth, and we need to show high aggressive growth and low flat growth to close achievement gaps. And so our math summary. For MCA Math, all of our grades, our MCA Math proficiency decreased for the district by about 12 percentage points, and the state decreased about 10 percentage points. We saw significant declines nationwide for math overall. The difference between us and the state is now 7 percentage points. In MCA Math for our tested grades, by each grade level, we saw a decrease and were below the state averages for those grade levels. Grade 3 saw the smallest decline, and grade 11 had a significant participation reduction from 2019. All of our student groups declined from 2019. Our Hispanic and multiracial students had the smallest declines and decreased their achievement gaps. However, our large achievement gaps persist and range from 18 to 42 percentage points. Most of our student groups are below the statewide average for that comparison group. However, our American Indian, Native American, white, and multiracial students were above the state. In looking at our comparable districts, we saw that our comparable districts all had significant declines from 2019. The average decrease was 12 percentage points, and the range of decrease was from 8 to 22 percentage points. Roseville performed above most of our comparables. Looking at our buildings, we saw that all buildings decreased, and our range of the decrease was 13 to 18 percentage points. And our FastBridge A-Math scores, we saw that Roseville area students showed higher rates of aggressive growth in 2022 compared to 2019. We also saw that white and multiracial students showed the highest aggressive growth. We'll now move to our MCA reading proficiency. This slide shows the trend of Roseville area schools, RAS, in blue compared to the statewide average in red. Roseville saw less of a decline in MCA reading scores, as Roseville had about a 6 percentage point decline, whereas the state declined about 8 percentage points. In 2022, Roseville is now below the state by about 1 percentage point, and in 2019, we were about 3 percentage points below. This slide shows Roseville area schools compared to Minnesota in reading proficiency by grade. Grade 3 student scores increased slightly from 2019 and were even with the statewide average in 2022. Grade 7 scores decreased from 2019, but outperformed the statewide average by 5 percentage points in 2022. Grade 8 scores decreased as well, but performed about the same as the statewide average. For grade 10, the student participation levels were significantly reduced in 2022 and cannot be used for comparison in 2019 or 2021. This slide shows trend data for our students by race and ethnicity. All of our student groups by race decreased from 2019. The decreases ranged from 4 to 30 percentage points. The smallest declines in percentage points were seen in our Asian and Hispanic student groups, which equated to small declines in achievement gaps compared to our white students. Our achievement gaps between our BIPOC and white students remain too high and persistent, and gaps ranged from 20 to 40 percentage points. This slide provides trend data for our students who qualify for educational benefits, students with an individual education plan, or IEP, and students who are English language learners. All of these student groups declined from 2019. This slide compares proficiency for our student groups to the statewide average for that group. Roseville is in dark blue and Minnesota is in light blue. Our American Indian, Native American, and white students performed above the state average. Our Hispanic, Black, multiracial, and EL students, along with our students with an IEP, perform even with the statewide average. This slide provides us with a look at how we relate to our comparable districts and includes data from 2019 in dark blue and 2022 in light blue. You can see that all comparable districts declined in their reading achievement. The average reading decrease was 8 percentage points. The range of decrease was 5 to 14 percentage points. The average achievement level for comparable districts was 44%. Roseville is above that average at 50%, and we outperform most of the comparable districts. This slide shows our school's reading achievement over a 3-year trend. From 2019 to 2022, the only school to show improvement was Central Park Elementary, with a 3 percentage point increase. The data from RAS is not able to be used as a comparison with the participation rates, which were much lower in 2022 than 2019. This slide shows A reading growth for all students, mostly at the elementary levels. From this reading test, we can see that we had more aggressive growth in 2022 than in 2019, which is important to continue to move students towards proficiency. A reading is an adaptive reading test, and it was mostly a test of reading skill and comprehension. This is the same data in the slide above, except for it's disaggregated by race and ethnicity. We see that Black students had the highest aggressive growth rate out of our student groups by race. This slide provides more FastBridge data. This test is provided at our elementary level and is individually administered to students. In early reading, students show their basic beginning reading skills. In the CBM reading, students read a passage to an assessor. These charts show the growth levels over 5 years of data. The early reading growth scores have moderated over time as the norms changed, with more students taking that test, thus the different amounts in aggressive growth. In early reading, we do see less aggressive growth and more flat growth comparing 2019 to 2022. In CBM reading, we also see more flat growth, but also more aggressive growth, with the modest and typical growth categories changing. This slide shows the same FastBridge tests, but only for the 2022 school year and broken down by race and ethnicity. In early reading, we see high aggressive growth for Black, white, and multiracial students. We also have high flat growth for Black, Asian, and Hispanic students. In CBM reading, we see the highest aggressive growth for Asian, Black, Hispanic, and white students. We also see high flat growth for American Indian, Native American, Black, and multiracial students. In our reading summary, our scores in reading declined less than math. Roseville had less decline in reading compared to the state from 2019 to 2022. And there's about a 1 percentage point difference between Roseville and the state. Only grade 3 increased scores from 2019 to 2022 and were even with the state. Grade 7 showed a decrease but outperformed the statewide average by 5 percentage points. Grade 8 also decreased and is now even with the statewide average. All of our student groups decreased from 2019. Our achievement gaps remain too high and range from 20 to 40 percentage points. American Indian, Native American, and white students perform above the statewide averages. Hispanic, Black, multiracial, English learner students and students with an IEP are even with the statewide average. All of our comparable districts declined in reading as well. Roseville declined less. And Roseville performed above 7 of our 8 comparable districts. Central Park was the only school that showed an increase over the 2019 to 2022 school years. And in FastBridge reading, our A reading, we showed more aggressive growth in 2022 than in 2019, and our Black students showed the highest aggressive growth than other student groups by race. In early reading, we saw from 2019 to 2022, students had less aggressive growth and more flat growth. We did see high aggressive growth coupled with high flat growth for multiple student groups. And for CBM reading, we saw more aggressive growth and higher flat growth overall and in most of our student groups. We'll now move into our MCA Science proficiency as a summary. MCA Science tests in 3rd, 5th, and high school. Roseville fell about 6 percentage points compared to the state, which fell about 9 percentage points. And Roseville is below the state by 8 percentage points. Roseville decreased in each tested grade. All student groups decreased except students with an IEP and English language learner students, who increased by 2 percentage points. White students, students with an IEP, and students who qualify for educational benefits all performed above statewide averages. Roseville outperformed 5 of our 8 comparable districts. And we're going to move into some of our district efforts. Interrupted instruction has been an issue state and nationwide. Some have framed our interrupted instruction as learning loss. However, we've been working to change the language about how we refer to it. We found it important to reframe it from a loss because we don't want to put the onus on our students. They didn't lose their learning. It was instruction that was interrupted. To help us move forward from interrupted instruction, you can see on this slide I listed a number of areas that we're focused on. One of the main areas of focus at the elementary level is our reading instruction training called LETRS, which is focused on the science of reading. We've been considering a systems change on elementary reading instruction based on findings that's coming from our English Language Arts program review that started just prior to the pandemic. With the pandemic, interrupted instruction, and some support from MDE, we knew that we couldn't wait and needed to start the training as soon as possible. We had one cohort of elementary staff move through the first part of LETRS training, and the second cohort is beginning this year. LETRS stands for Language Essentials for Teachers of Reading and Spelling and is based in brain research around how children learn to read. The LETRS training can be applied to any curriculum that is taught. It's a practice for teachers, not a curriculum package. It is a focus on how we teach the building blocks of reading to all readers, combining the word recognition and language comprehension. We decided to focus on literacy instruction at elementary, as we find this has an impact on math and all other subject areas. As you saw earlier, we continue to see reading proficiency right around 50%, and we know that literacy is a social justice issue. At the secondary level, we're continuing many of our grading practices that we started during the pandemic. These things move us towards a more equitable grading system, and our schools are reviewing the book, Grading for Equity, and working with many of the practices laid out in the book. The focus for Grading for Equity is on creating a grading system that is accurate, bias-resistant, and motivational. These tenets, along with our work in professional learning communities, focused on identifying power standards, assessing for those standards, and assessing the power standards are the work we are focused on. We're working towards developing an equal interval grading system that eliminates the outsized impact of a 0 in a 0 to 100 based grading scale, and the disproportional weighting of an F in that system. Other areas of focus include using the most recent evidence and opportunities for reassessment. As I mentioned, staff are continuing to work in professional learning communities. In these communities, teachers work in collaborative teams to identify the power standards, those benchmarks that are essential for their students to know. Especially now after the pandemic, it is really important that we continue to teach the standards at a grade level to ensure students continue at the level of rigor for their class. In our collaborative teamwork, staff also identify how they're going to assess for those standards and benchmarks, and what they're going to do if students don't learn the essential standards. In response to students who haven't learned, all of our sites have adopted the practice of what I need time, or win time. It may be called other things, brain space, radar time, etc. This is time that's built into the daily schedule to provide students further instruction or enrichment in the power standards. Many classrooms, especially at the elementary level, and depending on the needs of the students, have implemented class-wide interventions that focus on a skill that the majority of students need to master. Many of these are reading interventions, but some teachers have expanded this work to other subject areas as well. Even though at the elementary level we're focused on literacy, we have continued to provide teachers with the option of developing their math instructional skills. We haven't had this as a district-wide expectation, but we have had many teachers from elementary to middle level have opted into cognitively guided instruction training on their own time, either during the summer or in the evenings during the school year. CGI focuses on working with students with what students already know mathematically and building on their natural number sense and intuitive approaches to problem solving. Like LETRS, CGI is an instructional practice and not a curriculum or program. Finally, with the support of the Minnesota Department of Education and the COMPASS program, we're involved in a 9-month cohort training to develop a multi-tiered system of support, or MTSS. We have been building this over time and have been on hold during the pandemic. But now with some guidance and training, we will have a district-wide MTSS team and a handbook to guide our practices on implementation. MTSS focuses on supports with academic and social emotional behavior interventions. Thank you for listening to our information on our achievement report. We'll have a chance to discuss it at our upcoming DCAC meeting. Please bring any questions and focus that you'd like to our upcoming meeting, and we'll discuss them there. Thanks again for listening.